This isn't just some story I made up to get views. This is something that actually happened to me. It's the kind of thing you think only happens in movies, until it becomes your life. The centerpiece candle. A 3-wick behemoth we'd named Nob Hill Fog sat unlit on a pedestal of reclaimed redwood, its surface as smooth and gray as the San Francisco mist it was meant to evoke. Around me, the low hum of conversation filled the rented-out gallery space in Hayes Valley, a symphony of clinking glasses, investor schmoozing, and the palpable thrum of anticipation. This was it, the launch party for Amelia and Clara's Apothecary, the culmination of 2 years of grinding, of pouring every last dime and every waking hour into wax and wicks and essential oils. But as I stood there, clutching my phone, a single text message from my business partner, Amelia, burned a hole in the screen, immolating our entire shared future in just 11 words. It's just business. You were never part of the real plan. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. It started, as so many disasters do, with a dream. 2 years earlier, I was just Clara, a 26-year-old with a degree in chemistry and a soul-crushing job in a corporate lab where my primary function was to make sure one multi-billion-dollar soda company's sugar water tasted exactly the same in every can across the globe. My only escape was my tiny apartment in the Mission District, a space that smelled permanently of my experiments: lavender and leather, cardamom and sandalwood, peppercorn and pine. I was a scent artist. I blended fragrances that told stories, that evoked memories you didn't even know you had. It was my passion, my art, but it was also just a hobby, a collection of amber glass jars and dropper bottles that were slowly taking over my kitchen. Then I met Amelia. We were introduced by a mutual friend at a rooftop bar in Soma. She was everything I wasn't: polished, confident, with a razor-sharp smile and an MBA from Stanford. She talked about capitalization rates and market penetration with an easy fluency that both intimidated and mesmerized me. When I shyly mentioned my hobby, her eyes lit up with a terrifying, predatory gleam that I mistook for inspiration. Artisanal, locally sourced, story-driven home fragrances, she'd said, leaning forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Clara, that's not a hobby. That's a goldmine. San Francisco is eating that up right now. Within a week, she was in my apartment, sniffing my concoctions with a practiced air of connoisseurship. She held up a candle I'd called Alcatraz Nightfall, a blend of salt spray, damp stone, and wild fennel. We can sell this for $60 a unit, easy. I was floored. $60? I was pouring them in old jam jars for friends. But Amelia saw a brand. She saw a lifestyle. She saw a path to the kind of wealth I'd only ever read about. She sketched out a business plan on a cocktail napkin that night at a dive bar called The Saloon in North Beach. She'd handle the business, the marketing, the finances, the legal stuff. I would be the creative force, the alchemist. We would be partners, 50-50. We shook on it, sealing the deal over cheap beer and the wail of a blues guitar. Amelia and Clara's Apothecary was born. The first year was a blur of beautiful, chaotic creation. We worked out of my kitchen, then my garage. I spent my days covered in soy wax, my fingers raw from tying wicks, while Amelia was a whirlwind of motion, her phone permanently attached to her ear. She built a stunning website, cultivated an Instagram following that grew by thousands every week, and talked her way into getting our products into the hippest boutiques from the Marina to the Mission. She was brilliant. She could charm anyone, sell anything. When she spoke about our brand ethos and curated scent journeys, even I, the person who actually made the things, felt myself getting swept up in the narrative she was weaving. We were a success. We were featured in SF Weekly, got a glowing mention in a Vogue online piece about Bay Area artisans. We were outgrowing my garage. Amelia found us a small workshop space in the Dog Patch, an old industrial building that smelled of rust and potential. It was expensive, but she assured me it was a necessary step. "You can't build an empire from a garage, Clara," she'd said, smiling her $1,000,000 smile. "We need to look the part to get the big money." The big money was her obsession. While I was perfecting a new scent based on the smell of old books and rain on the redwoods of Muir Woods, she was hunting for venture capital. She talked about scaling, about getting into national retailers, about a buyout that would make us both rich beyond our wildest dreams. I just wanted to make beautiful things. I trusted her. I trusted her completely. Why wouldn't I? She was my partner, my friend. We celebrated every small victory with expensive dinners at Zuni Cafe or late-night cocktails at Top of the Mark, looking out over the city lights that we were convinced we were about to conquer. She handled all the paperwork, the accounts, the LLC formation. When I'd ask about the details, she'd wave a dismissive, manicured hand. "Don't you worry your beautiful, creative head about this stuff. That's what I'm here for. You just keep making magic." It was exactly what I wanted to hear. The administrative side of things felt like a foreign language to me, a world of soulless forms and legal jargon. I was an artist. She was the businesswoman. It was the perfect partnership. Or so I thought. The signs were there, of course. They always are in retrospect. Little things. A comment about how the brand's real value was in its marketability, not its quaint origin. Story. The way she started referring to the company as my venture in conversations with potential investors. She started taking meetings I wasn't invited to, explaining them away as boring financial stuff that would just stress me out. I was so buried in production, trying to keep up with the demand she was creating, that I let it all slide. I chose to believe in the dream we'd created together. The launch party was meant to be our coronation. Amelia had secured a round of angel investing from a group of tech magnates she'd met at some exclusive Napa Valley retreat. This party was for them, a way to showcase our new luxury line and prove we were ready for the big leagues. For 2 weeks, I barely slept, personally hand-pouring the 100 centerpiece candles that would be the party favors. Each one was perfect. The night of the party, I arrived at the gallery early. Everything was immaculate. Waitstaff moved through the space with trays of champagne. A string quartet played softly in the corner. The investors were there, a collection of smug, polo-shirted men who looked at my work with the detached interest of a biologist studying a microbe. But Amelia wasn't there. I called her. It went straight to voicemail. I texted, no reply. An hour ticked by. Then another. The investors were getting restless. Her lead angel, a shark named Marcus Thorne, cornered me by the redwood pedestal. "So where's the brains of this outfit?" he asked, not unkindly, but with an unmistakable edge. Amelia was supposed to walk us through the Q4 growth projections. My face flushed with a hot, prickling shame. I had no idea what the Q4 growth projections were. I didn't even know if we had any. I stammered something about her being stuck in traffic on the Bay Bridge. A lie so flimsy it felt like gauze. I kept smiling, my face aching from the effort, making small talk and praying her silver Tesla would pull up to the curb. And then at 9:15 p.m. my phone buzzed. It was her. My heart leaped with a desperate, pathetic relief. But it wasn't a call. It was the text. The 11 words that detonated my life. "It's just business. You were never part of the real plan." I read it once, then twice. The sounds of the party faded into a dull roar. The champagne in my hand might as well have been acid. I looked at the candle, our Nob Hill fog, sitting there so placid and perfect. I thought of the thousands of hours, the burned fingers, the sacrificed weekends. I thought of the cocktail napkin in my desk drawer, the symbol of our shared dream. It was all a lie. The entire 2-year partnership was a meticulously crafted performance, and I had been the unwitting, unpaid lead actress in her one-woman show. The humiliation was a physical thing, a crushing weight that buckled my knees. Marcus Thorne was watching me, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. I had to get out of there. I turned and walked, pushing through the bewildered crowd, out the gallery doors and into the cool, indifferent San Francisco night. I didn't stop walking until I reached the water's edge at the Embarcadero, the bay stretching out before me like a vast, dark grave. It was only then that I realized I was still holding my phone, her message glowing on the screen like a poisoned dart. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that she hadn't just left. She had sabotaged me. This was only the beginning. The ghosting was just the first step in a much larger, crueler design. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. My first frantic call the next morning was to our shared business bank account. The automated voice on the other end was cheerful and utterly devastating. The account, which should have held the entirety of the angel investment, a cool $250,000, had a balance of $117.34. Amelia had cleared it out. Every last cent. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up my throat. I raced to the dog patch workshop, my heart hammering against my ribs. A bright orange eviction notice was plastered on the door. Amelia hadn't paid the rent in 2 months. Inside, the place was a tomb. But it wasn't empty. It had been selectively pillaged. All of the finished inventory was gone. The high-end packaging we'd spent a fortune on vanished. My laptop, which contained all of our digital branding assets and customer lists, was missing from my desk. But she'd left behind the raw materials, the giant vats of wax, the 50-pound bags of wicks, the huge, expensive canisters of essential oils. Things that were heavy, difficult to move, and worthless without the knowledge of how to combine them. It was a calculated act of cruelty, designed to leave me with the husk of a business, the shell of our dream, and no means to rebuild it. My calls to Amelia, dozens of them, went to a disconnected number. Her social media profiles were wiped clean, her digital footprint erased. It was as if she had ceased to exist. She hadn't just ghosted me. She'd vaporized herself. I was left to deal with the fallout. The furious investors, the angry landlord, the confused suppliers who had fronted us materials on credit. Marcus Thorne, the lead investor, was surprisingly calm when I finally worked up the nerve to call him. "Let me guess," he'd said, his voice flat. "She's gone, and so is the money." I choked out a yes. There was a long pause. "Look, kid," he said, his tone softening with a weary pity I found more insulting than anger. "You got played? It happens. Amelia pitched us a story, a good one. She was the star. You were... What did she call you? Her little artist. We invested in her, not you. The money's gone. Consider it an expensive lesson." An expensive lesson. He'd lost money. I had lost my entire world. I had poured my soul into that business. I had trusted Amelia with my art, my future. Her little artist. The words echoed in my mind, a fresh wave of humiliation washing over me. She had never seen me as a partner. I was a resource to be exploited, a quaint part of the brand story to be told and then discarded. I spent a week in a fog of grief and despair, locked in my apartment, ignoring the increasingly threatening letters and calls. I felt hollowed out, stupid, and utterly alone. The business was dead, I was deeply in debt, and the person I had considered my closest friend was a sociopathic phantom. It was during that week, while drowning my sorrows in cheap takeout and binge-watching mindless television, that I started to get angry. A slow, simmering rage began to burn through the fog of my depression. How could she do this? How could she be so callous, so utterly devoid of conscience? I started digging. I tore my apartment apart, looking for any piece of paper, any clue she might have left behind. In a shoebox under my bed, tucked away with old birthday cards, I found it, the cocktail napkin from the saloon, our founding document. Next to it was a folder I'd barely glanced at when Amelia had given it to me a year ago. "Just some boring LLC stuff for your records," she'd said. At the time, I'd simply filed it away, trusting her completely. Now, I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a copy of the Articles of Organization for Amelia and Clara's Apothecary, LLC. I scanned the document, my eyes blurring with rage and confusion. I was listed as a member, yes, but Amelia was listed as the managing member, with sole authority over the company's finances and operational decisions. It was all there, in dense legalese I had never bothered to read. She had given herself total control from the very beginning. But as I kept reading, a tiny critical detail snagged my attention. The document was a draft. At the top, in faint watermark letters, were the words, "Draft, for review only." There was no official seal, no filing stamp from the California Secretary of State. I scrambled to my own laptop, the old one she hadn't bothered to steal, and navigated to the state's business search portal. I typed in our company name. My heart stopped. A single result came back. Amelia and Clara's Apothecary, LLC. Status: application incomplete. She had started the process, used the draft to secure the bank account and the investment, but she had never actually finalized the filing. She had gotten lazy, or arrogant, or both. Legally, our company was a ghost. It didn't exist. A wild, desperate hope began to bubble up inside me. I kept digging online, my fingers flying across the keyboard. If the LLC was never formed, what about the other intellectual property? The brand name? The logo she'd had a friend design? I searched the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office database. I searched for Amelia and Clara's Apothecary. Nothing. I searched for our logo. Nothing. She hadn't protected any of it. In her haste to build the narrative and secure the cash, she had neglected the single most important step in building a brand: owning it. She hadn't just left me with the raw materials. She had left me the entire blueprint, unprotected and unclaimed. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, to the shelves lined with the remnants of my passion. The amber jars, the dropper bottles filled with precious oils. I picked up a bottle of vetiver, the earthy, grounding scent filling my lungs. She had taken the money. She had taken the inventory. She had tried to take my dignity. But she hadn't taken my talent. And she had made a fatal mistake. She had left the door not just unlocked, but wide open. The rage that had been simmering within me now sharpened into a cold, clear point of resolve. This wasn't over. I wasn't her little artist to be discarded. I was the heart of that company, and she had just reminded me of that fact. The despair was gone, replaced by an icy determination. She thought she had erased me from the picture. She had no idea I was about to paint a whole new one, with her completely cut out of the frame. My first move was to find a lawyer. Not some friend of a friend doing pro bono work, but a real fire-breathing intellectual property dragon. I found him through a legal aid service for artists in San Francisco. His name was Daniel Chen, and his office in the financial district was a stark, minimalist space that screamed efficiency and high hourly rates. He listened to my entire sordid story without interruption, his face impassive. When I was done, I pushed the draft LLC agreement and the printouts from the trademark search across his glass desk. He examined them for a long time, his silence stretching my nerves taut. Finally, he looked up at me, a flicker of something, interest, maybe even excitement, in his dark eyes. "She's arrogant," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "She built a house on quicksand. She created a brand, generated goodwill, took investor money, all for a legal entity and a trademark that don't actually exist." He leaned forward. "This is a fascinating and incredibly stupid mess. What do you want to do about it?" "I want to take it back," I said, the words tasting like metal in my mouth. "I want to take back what I built." Daniel nodded slowly. "We can't get the investor money back. That was wired to an account she controlled, and she's almost certainly moved it offshore by now. It's gone. But the brand? The brand is another story. The brand is currently an orphan. It belongs to whoever claims it first. And since you were the one who developed the actual products and can prove it, you have a strong claim of prior use." He laid out the strategy. It was simple, audacious, and utterly terrifying. We wouldn't go after Amelia and Clara's Apothecary. That name was tainted, and it still had her name on it, which was the last thing I wanted. Instead, we would create a new company, my company, and we would file an immediate trademark application for the branding elements I had created. The key scent names, like Nob Hill Fog and Alcatraz Nightfall, the distinctive amber jar and minimalist label design, which was known as trade dress, and a new brand name, a name that would be a quiet, constant declaration of victory. Clara's Apothecary. The problem was money. I was broke. The legal fees for a trademark application and the formation of a new LLC would be thousands of dollars I didn't have. Daniel saw the panic on my face. "I'll tell you what," he said. "I find this case professionally compelling. Let's do a contingency hybrid. You cover the hard filing fees, about $1,500. I'll defer my own fees until you're profitable." "I'm betting on you, Clara. Don't make me regret it." I almost cried with relief. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my parents in Sacramento. I swallowed my pride, confessed the whole humiliating disaster, and asked for a loan. They were heartbroken for me, but they didn't hesitate. The money was in my account the next morning. The race was on. While Daniel handled the legal filings, I got to work. My dog patch workshop was gone, so I converted my parents' garage into a makeshift candle lab. It was a humbling step backward, from a trendy SF workshop to the suburban garage I'd grown up in, the air thick with the smell of my dad's sawdust and my mom's laundry detergent. But it was a start. I spent every cent of my remaining savings on wax, wicks, and a small batch of my most crucial oils. Then I turned to the one asset I had left, the story. I reactivated the company's Instagram account, which Amelia, in her haste, had forgotten to delete. I couldn't change the handle yet, but I could change the narrative. I deleted all the slick, corporate-style photos of Amelia. I started posting raw, authentic pictures of myself in the garage, my hands covered in wax, pouring candles into jars. I wrote long, emotional captions about starting over, about the importance of authenticity, about being a creator betrayed. I never mentioned Amelia by name. I didn't have to. I talked about my original vision and reclaiming my art. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Our old customers, the ones who had loved us from the farmers' market days, rallied around me. They sent messages of support. They asked when they could buy my products again. A small but fiercely loyal community began to form, united by a shared sense of injustice. A few weeks later, I got a strange email. It was from a woman who owned a small boutique in Aspen, Colorado. She had been one of our first wholesale clients. She said a woman named Annabelle Dubois had contacted her, claiming to be the founder of a new, exclusive fragrance company from New York. This Annabelle was offering her a line of candles with scents like Metropolitan Mist and Central Park After Dark. The description sounded familiar. My blood ran cold. I asked her to send me the sales deck. When the PDF arrived, I felt a fresh wave of nausea. The branding was different, all sleek black and gold, but the products were mine. Metropolitan Mist was a clear knockoff of Nob Hill Fog. The scent notes were identical. Amelia had resurfaced. She hadn't just run with the money. She had taken my formulas and was rebranding them as her own, under a new name and a new identity. She was trying to erase me and my contribution completely. But this time, I wasn't a naive, trusting artist. I was a woman with a purpose. And thanks to Daniel, I was about to own the legal ammunition I needed to fight back. 2 days later, an email from Daniel landed in my inbox. The subject line was simple. It's official. I opened it. Attached was the certificate from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. The trademark for Clara's Apothecary and its associated trade dress were officially registered. They were mine. Now the war could truly begin. Amelia, or Annabelle Dubois, as she was now calling herself, had allied with a monster. A quick search of her new company, Auralux, revealed it to be a subsidiary of a massive, soulless home goods conglomerate called Global Living, Inc. They were notorious for acquiring small, artisanal brands and stripping them for parts, mass-producing their products and gutting their quality. Amelia hadn't just stolen my formulas, she'd sold them to the highest bidder, a corporate behemoth with an army of lawyers. My small victory with the trademark suddenly felt fragile. I was a woman pouring candles in her parents' garage. She was backed by a multi-billion-dollar corporation. For a few days, the fear crept back in. Who was I to think I could take on a giant like that? I was David, and my slingshot was loaded with a single, unproven trademark. Daniel, however, was unfazed. "This is good for us," he'd said over the phone, his voice buzzing with a lawyer's predatory excitement. "She's overplayed her hand. She's attached herself to a public company with a reputation to protect. They won't want the kind of bad press this story could generate." His plan was to lay a trap. We wouldn't send a cease and desist letter right away. That would just be a warning shot, giving them time to prepare, to bury us in legal paperwork and drain my meager resources. No, we would wait for the perfect moment. We would let Amelia get comfortable in her new stolen life. We would let her believe she had gotten away with it. And then, when she was at her most public, most vulnerable, we would strike. I focused on what I could control. I poured all my energy into rebuilding my business, slowly and deliberately. I launched a new website for Clara's Apothecary. I started with just 3 of my original scents, the ones I knew my old customers loved. The response was better than I could have dreamed. The first batch sold out in an hour. The story was my marketing. People weren't just buying candles. They were buying a piece of the narrative. They were rooting for the underdog. I used the profits to buy more materials, to rent a tiny corner of a shared workspace in Oakland. It was a slow, grueling process, but every candle sold, every positive review, felt like a small act of defiance. I was building my fortress, one brick at a time. Meanwhile, Amelia's star was rising. Aurolux launched with a massive PR blitz. There were articles about its visionary founder, Annabelle Dubois, in major design magazines. I saw her face on my computer screen, smiling that same polished, predatory smile, talking about her unique approach to fragrance, her years of dedication to the craft. Every word was a lie, a dagger twisting in my gut. But I followed Daniel's advice. I stayed silent. I archived every article, every interview, every piece of evidence. I let her build her house of cards higher and higher. The moment we were waiting for came about 6 months later. An announcement for the industry's biggest trade show, the Home and Lifestyle Expo in Las Vegas. Aurolux was a premier sponsor. They would be unveiling their full product line in a keynote presentation, hosted by none other than Amelia herself. "This is it," Daniel said. "This is our stage." The plan he proposed was both brilliant and terrifyingly public. I would get a booth at the same trade show. I drained my business account to afford the smallest, most pathetic 10x10 space they offered, stuck in a forgotten corner of the Las Vegas Convention Center. Daniel's firm fronted the rest of the cost. For weeks, I worked like a woman possessed, making as much inventory as I possibly could. I designed my booth to be the antithesis of everything Aurolux represented. While I knew theirs would be slick and corporate, mine was warm and personal. I used reclaimed wood, displays of the raw ingredients, lavender, cedar, peppercorns, and a simple, elegant sign that read, "Clara's Apothecary." The original. The centerpiece of my booth was a beautifully framed display. On one side was a copy of my official trademark certificate. On the other, blown-up photos of me and Amelia in the early days, working in my cramped mission apartment, laughing, covered in wax. Beneath them, a small, discreet plaque. The whole story. Flying to Las Vegas, I felt a tremor of fear in my stomach. I was walking into the lion's den with nothing but the truth as my weapon. Setting up my little booth felt surreal. All around me, massive corporate displays were being erected by teams of union workers. Across the vast hall, I could see the Aurolux Pavilion. It was a monstrosity of black marble and gold lighting, with a huge video screen flashing Amelia's face. It was designed to intimidate, to project power and invincibility. And there I was, with my little wooden table and my framed photos. The night before the expo opened, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my cheap hotel room off the strip, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and resolve. Amelia had humiliated me in public at our launch party. Tomorrow, I would return the favor. The first day of the expo was a blur. The doors opened, and a sea of industry buyers, press, and influencers flooded the convention floor. My booth, tucked away near the freight elevators, was a lonely island. Most people walked right by, their eyes drawn to the flashier displays. I felt a pang of doubt. Had we made a huge mistake? Was this just a desperate, pathetic gesture? At 11 a.m., the keynote presentation for Auralux began. From my distant corner, I could hear the professionally produced hype video, the thunderous applause. I knew Amelia was up there on stage, spinning her web of lies to a captivated audience. I took a deep breath, straightened my display, and waited. About 45 minutes later, the presentation ended, and the crowd began to disperse. People started to wander the floor, heading for the big-name booths. But to get to the main aisles from the keynote hall, they had to pass my section. At first, it was just a trickle. A buyer from a small chain of boutiques in Texas stopped, intrigued by the name. "Clara's Apothecary," she read aloud. That sounds so familiar. Her eyes drifted to the photos. Wait a minute. I know that other woman. That's Annabelle Dubois from Auralux. I gave her a calm, gentle smile. Her name is Amelia, I said quietly. And this is where the story of those fragrances actually began. I didn't have to raise my voice. I just told her the truth, pointing to the trademark certificate, the photos, the dates. Her eyes widened. She picked up one of my candles, the Nob Hill Fog, and inhaled deeply. My God, she whispered. It's the same scent. She looked from my face to the distant, gleaming Auralux pavilion, and a look of dawning comprehension and disgust spread across her features. She was the first, but she wasn't the last. Word of mouth is a powerful force, especially in a closed-off, gossipy industry like home goods. The woman from Texas told a colleague. That colleague told a popular industry blogger who was always looking for a scoop. The blogger, a notoriously sharp woman named Susan Vance, descended on my booth with a skeptical, hungry look in her eyes. I told her everything. I showed her the emails, the draft LLC, the timeline. I gave her Daniel's number. She didn't say much, just recorded our entire conversation on her phone, her expression unreadable. For the next hour, a small but steady stream of people came to my booth. The whispers started to ripple through the convention center. Did you see that little booth in the back? The Auralux founder apparently stole the whole company. There's another woman, the real creator. The tide was turning. I could feel it. I was no longer an invisible woman in a forgotten corner. I was the center of a growing storm, and then I saw her. Amelia was striding down the main aisle, flanked by a trio of gray-suited executives from Global Living Inc. She was glowing, basking in the success of her presentation. She looked like the queen of the world. Her entourage was laughing, patting her on the back. She was so caught up in her own triumph that she didn't see my booth until she was almost on top of it. She stopped dead. Her smile froze, then melted from her face, replaced by a mask of pure shock and horror. Her eyes darted from me to the display of photos, to the growing crowd of onlookers who were now watching this little drama unfold with rapt attention. The executives following her stopped too, their expressions shifting from congratulatory to confused. Annabelle? One of them, a man with a severe, powerful face, asked, "What is this? Who is this woman?" Amelia's face, which had been pale, now flushed a deep, ugly red. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked cornered, trapped. I didn't say a word. I just stood there behind my little table and met her gaze. In my eyes, she wouldn't find the hurt, naive girl she had betrayed. She would only find cold, hard, unforgiving steel. It was in that moment of silent confrontation that the blogger, Susan Vance, stepped forward, her phone held up like a weapon. "Ms. Dubois," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Susan Vance, Retail Insider." Could you comment on the allegation that the core intellectual property for the Auralux line was stolen from your former partner, Clara Stevens? The executive's head snapped towards Amelia. The color drained from her face completely. The trap had been sprung. Her beautifully constructed world of lies was collapsing around her, right here, in the middle of the Las Vegas Convention Center, in front of the very people she had worked so hard to impress. She stood there, silent and exposed, the star of a show that had just been canceled. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Susan Vance's article titled "The Scent of a Lie, Auralux Founder's Deceitful Past Exposed at Vegas Expo" went live that evening. It was a meticulously researched bombshell, complete with quotes from Daniel, photos from my booth, and a damning comparison of the trademark filing dates. It went viral within the industry. Global Living Inc.'s PR department went into full crisis mode. Facing a PR nightmare and a clear-cut trademark infringement lawsuit, they did what all massive corporations do. They cut their losses. By the next morning, Amelia, or Annabelle, had been fired. A press release announced that the Auralux line was being indefinitely postponed, pending an internal review of its intellectual property origins. Amelia was publicly and professionally annihilated. She had flown into Las Vegas the conquering hero. She would fly out a pariah. My little booth, in the meantime, was mobbed. Buyers who had ignored me on the first day were now lining up, not just to hear the story, but to place orders. They saw authenticity. They saw a fighter. They saw a brand with a narrative that was 1,000 times more compelling than the corporate-tested lies Amelia had been selling. I left Las Vegas with more wholesale orders than I could have fulfilled in a year. The story of my victory became a legend. I was the woman who had taken on a giant and won. The loan from my parents was paid back within 3 months. Within 6, I moved out of the shared workspace and into my own large studio in Berkeley, a beautiful, light-filled space that smelled of success and creation. I hired my first employees. Clara's apothecary grew, not with the explosive, unstable trajectory Amelia had chased, but with a slow, steady, and strong foundation built on quality and truth. I never heard from Amelia directly again. The last I saw of her was about 2 years later. I was in New York for a meeting with a buyer from Bloomingdale's, a meeting that had been set up by one of the executives who had been with her on that fateful day in Vegas. He had reached out to me, apologized, and offered to make an introduction as a form of corporate penance. As I was leaving the flagship store on 59th Street, I saw a familiar figure working behind the fragrance counter. It was her. Her hair was different, her clothes were less expensive, but it was unmistakably Amelia. She was arranging bottles of perfume, her movements robotic and lifeless. Her name tag read simply, Amy. Our eyes met for a fleeting second across the polished marble floor. I saw a flicker of recognition, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated shame. She looked away first, turning her back to me, pretending to be busy with a display. I didn't gloat. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked out into the bustling New York City afternoon. I had already won. Tonight, I'm sitting in my own office, overlooking my own bustling workshop. The air is filled with a complex blend of my newest creations. On my desk, next to a photo of my parents, sits a single unlit candle in a simple amber jar. It's from the very first batch I ever poured under the name Clara's Apothecary. Sometimes I just look at it and remember. She stole my trust, my work, and my friend. So I built an empire with the only thing she couldn't touch. My name. The end.